Ah, right, The Last of Us character, and it could. Whoa, 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 back up. Right. You've done character videos on Tommy, Henry and Sam, a thing about Ellie, and Nat, and what? Two questions. One, how can the Cordyceps viral infection be a character? And two, why are you talking to yourself? Oh, hello, friends. Dino again. Alright, well, look, the second one's easy. I'm weird. But the first question is kind of interesting because, in a way, it sort of is a character, but I'll get round to that in a bit. For now, I'd like you to think of this as part character examination and part public information service film or video. You see, I'm actually here to help people, some people. The fact is, several citizens of a particular country, let's not name that country, we don't want to be accused of perpetuating a cruel stereotype saying they're always confusing fiction and reality. Anyway, these good citizens spend tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of their US dollars on defending themselves against a zombie apocalypse. Verily 'tis true, it actually happens. Now, we all know there's no such thing as dead people being not dead. But The Last of Us gave us a slight problem. Cordyceps does exist in a different form, but it exists all the same. And it's very easy to imagine thousands of these committed virgins absolutely losing their shit, and losing even more of their hard-earned cash to exploitative companies who will seize the opportunity to sell them even more guns and zombie-proof fabric, whatever that is. If we can convince just one, which is frankly a more realistic figure, thousands, anyway, that humans will never fall victim to such a disease, well, we will have done a good thing. So, this video will be split into two sections. First, we'll look at why our country cousins need not worry about the human strain of Cordyceps. Then we'll examine its role in The Last of Us. Why then should there be no fears about the Cordyceps virus in The Last of Us attacking humans? Because it isn't real. Right, so we can move on to the second bit? Nah, just kidding. It is worth looking at. There's a big difference, and a significant one, between the game version and the real life Cordyceps which infects ants. In the wild, which is where they live, the ant's brain is reprogrammed to attack those of its own species for the purpose of spreading the infection, and nothing else. In other words, once that single purpose is hardwired, even its instinct to feed is gone, so it dies pretty quickly. Human beings, of course, are much bigger, much more complicated things, especially when it comes to the brain. In ants, the disease doesn't have much work to do. Switch off mating and feeding, activate attack mode, and that's just about it. The human brain isn't just indescribably more complex, not to mention freaking huge in comparison. It also comes packed with defense mechanisms. It generally knows when things are about to go tits up and will try to do something about it. On those rare occasions when it comes up with no answers, it comes up with an alternative: death. And consider all those motor functions the brain hands out, which allow us to walk, use our hands, pick things up, climb, run, masturbate, the list goes on. This imaginary human strain of Cordyceps would have to come with a phenomenal IQ, plus a damn good map to show where all the necessary functional areas are located, spread over literally miles of synaptic highways. It isn't just a monumental task. Every step along the way is specific and has to be genetically precise. Which leads to the character, or rather the role, of Cordyceps in The Last of Us. There is a temptation, and I've been guilty of it, to think about how and why it happened, perhaps wondering if it's a Naughty Dog comment on mankind's interference with nature. In other words, admittedly perhaps simplified, saying the infected are a product of us. Remember, the newspaper Sarah picks up at the start of the game carries a report which points the finger at contaminated crops, presumably alluding to something like a rogue pesticide. Seeing it that way can make a difference. The behaviour of the infected is managed in such a way that we're inclined to feel some sympathy for the suffering. I've talked before about how this is encouraged in the sound design, but it's also encouraged if we believe that we are, to some extent, responsible for the world that created them. And in all honesty, it works if you want to see it that way. But my own view has changed, and a few moments ago when I described the infected as a product of us, I preceded it with perhaps simplified. It's a strange realisation that we can in fact take that simplification to its extreme and say the background to the infection is irrelevant, and it's because the end result of it, these zombie-like shells of former humans, could never exist. Now, there could of course be an epidemic of illness, perhaps even something fatal, but ultimately the human brain is too complex a thing to be completely reprogrammed by a few errant spores of fungus. This seems to be pointing towards a suggestion that we can forget about sympathising with the infected and just see them as the random result of some pandemic catastrophe. Well, not quite. You see, what's changed for me is that I used to place all of the appropriate elements of the game, its characters, groups, social environments, and of course those outside the quarantine zones, and even the infected, within the context of the Cordyceps outbreak. In other words, the infection created the world of The Last of Us. Now I see it more as that world representing society's reaction to that disaster, the way it failed to effectively respond, how the military exploited the situation to give themselves autonomy, how some groups of people resorted to the most inhumane methods to survive. And in this context, the infected could easily have been replaced with traditional zombies, so it's full marks to Naughty Dog for avoiding one of the most tired and overused tropes in gaming, and instead choosing something based on a real-world phenomenon, but still impossible. Oh, talking of impossible, the story is forced to make some concessions for the sake of gameplay, which actually show why this infection couldn't survive. Sometimes what we see is actually contradictory. For example, one of the most effective barriers between our characters and infected is, would you believe, a closed door. We see it in the museum, in the high school, in the sewers, other places I think. The idea is that if the infected can't see you, they will only get through a door by breaking it down. The viral infection removes logic processes, and just turning a door handle becomes too difficult a thing to work out. Yet, even at the clicker stage, the infected can deal with some logic problems. If you alert them in the downtown subway area, you will see one occasionally hop over a low wall, yet clickers are blind, and walls are generally silent. According to common sense, there are a few areas where the infected, for a variety of reasons, should have a lot of trouble getting around. But their ability to survive at all is a stretch, and it can be summed up in one word: winter. And we can go back to ants here. Cordyceps attacks ants which inhabit mainly temperate regions, in other words those without seasonal extremes. Plus, of course, they don't live long enough to have to deal with that kind of thing. For them, it's either wet or dry, later we die. Humans have more to contend with. Big bodies which need food regularly. Bodies which also have to be protected from extremes of temperature. It doesn't matter that the infection removes the ability to think about that. Human tissue is what it is, and the physiological effects of extreme cold will happen regardless of whether or not the brain acknowledges them. Saying, "I will not feel cold," isn't enough, the damage will still be done. Without shelter and warmth, the infected body will freeze to death in exactly the same way an uninfected one will. So what's involved in securing shelter and warmth? There's lots of stuff. Finding somewhere suitable, gathering fuel, having a way to actually get a fire going, never mind keeping it going. There are a lot of practical issues, and resolving them involves logical thought processes and communal effort. The infected have neither. The simple truth is that outside temperate zones, the infection would be wiped out by its first exposure to winter. Alright, I'm going to finish with a little have you ever noticed thing. What the infection is supposed to do is reduce the instructions from the brain to seeking out humans and attacking them, both for spreading the virus and feeding. Yet in the game we get something different. We see the feeding part on a couple of occasions, the ones that spring to mind. The very first encounter with infected while we were with Tess, and another, this time with Tess and Ellie, in the downtown subway. Now, I know this is for the purposes of gameplay, but throughout the game, if you try unsuccessfully to fend off an infected attack, it kills you. You also see that happen in Left Behind, when Ellie is given the bow and arrow, and there's 3 instances where you can pit hunters and infected against each other. Now, a hunter may be killed by an infected, but the infected will never deliver a bite and then run off. So it makes me wonder a couple of things. By 2033, 90% of the population is dead, and many of the remaining 10% are safely housed in quarantine zones. The infected are already in severe competition with each other, with so few people remaining. But here's the thing. That being the case, the instinct to spread the infection, which already seems to be a bit of a rarity, must be a very distant second to the need for food. But there's more. It looks, to me at least, as if the instinct to spread the virus doesn't exist at all. It can only happen if a potential victim, i.e. food source, happens to escape after being bitten. And how often does that happen? I mean, there's no way to tell, but we do see quite a bit of evidence that those who get bitten chose to kill themselves rather than turn. All I'm saying is that by 2033, the chances of the infection spreading must be tiny. And who knows, by 2038, it may be all but eradicated of its own accord. So, don't worry guys, I think you're gonna be okay. That's it, Dino out. I'll see you soon. Bye, lovers.